Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the 3 o'clock time frame. I hope you got your coffee. Hope you got your caffeine of some sort. I'm happy to be here. My name is Ann Gore, and I'm a legal technology consultant, and you'll notice that there's only 3 of us here. One of our esteemed colleagues, Matt Blaine, the law calls and texted me yesterday and said, you're not going to be happy, and he had to be in court today. So we have clients, and we all have to be here. I'm very happy to be having joining me today Dennis Garcia, who Dennis almost, I was paling when he was saying, I almost called you last night to tell you I couldn't be here. I'm like, oh my goodness. So I'll let each one of them talk, and Dawn Knight is from PNC Bank, and I have
nothing better to do. I was always going to be here.
Yeah. So Matt, we were going to put a little picture up and have a chair over there with Matt in absentia, and he is from a law, and he's helped a lot with helping us design this program today, so I'm very disappointed that he's not here. Dennis, you can, encapsulate a little bit about what you do. You have to give him the mic, Dawn.
So yes, hi. Well, first off, my name is Dennis Garcia. I'm an assistant general counsel for Microsoft. I'm based in Chicago. I lead our legal support function to our enterprise services and our consulting services teams throughout the United States. I spend a lot of my time shaping and negotiating whatever contracts we need to put in place with our big enterprise customers to do business with them. So a lot of consulting services work, what we're calling now our digital transformation services work, or cloud computing agreements. Also spend a lot of time on compliance issues, data privacy considerations as well. So look forward to the discussion, and turn it over to.
Oh, and there's. It's me next.
Oh, it's you,
I'll do me next, unless you want to talk about.
By all means.
You get me. I think we did it alphabetically. And I'm Ann Gore, and I'm a legal technology consultant, and my focus is working with small to mid-sized law firms and corporate legal departments. So usually in the 15, 20 attorney space to 100, 150 attorney space. So I do a lot of technology and moving people over the fence. Like, let's start moving forward. So I'm based out of New Jersey, but I tend to go just about anywhere anybody needs me to go. Dawn?
Sure. I'm Don Knight. I'm in legal operations at PNC Bank. Essentially, that's just the business side of the legal department, so everything that the attorneys don't want to do, we do. My main focuses are on our technology, though, and e-discovery. So that's sort of where I tend to dip my foot into the information governance pool.
Right. So I was happy to have all these gentlemen join me, and it wouldn't be a program with attorneys without having a disclaimer. So I always put disclaimers on so that everybody's protected. So that's how you know that I work with attorneys every day of my life, and I choose to do so. Here's where I wanted to start. We've always talked, and I love working with the InfoGov team. That term, information governance strategist, right? That's where many of us sit. And so as part of that, I wanted to bring to light a little bit about IG versus IG for legal, right? And IG for the legal department is just a little bit different. And why is that? And a legal department is really like a law firm that is sitting inside of your enterprise environment. So those of you that have not had to dip your toe into that environment, you kind of go, well, what's the big deal? Why do they need something different? Why can't they do what the rest of us are doing? And this is where Business Requirements 101. This is where your business analyst hat comes on. They need different tools. They're in charge of the legal oversight for the entire organization. They're the ones making sure that they're not going bankrupt, that they're not getting bought out, that they're not putting themselves at risk. They're handling not only the regulatory oversight for the organizations, whatever their regulatory rules are. So if they're financial, they're handling making sure we're meeting those. But they also have their own regulatory things from a legal oversight. There's lots of collaboration that goes on with external counsel, with the business units internal, within their own organization, inside the law firm, if you will, the corporate legal department, which you will also hear them called the Office of the General Counsel. You will hear either one. You'll hear them called CLD or OGC. And it's not counsel like Boy Scout counsel, like CIL. It's SEL. So make sure if you're writing an RFP that you don't send it to the Office of the General CIL. Some other things, they use different applications. They don't use necessarily all the same tools that you would find in a business environment. They have different processes, completely different processes. They're legal, they're litigators, they have contracts that are different. They just have different processes, and they're data-driven. They are paper, like I chose that graphic with paper raining down on the umbrella. I don't know why they aren't just covered in dust mites, but they are paper-driven, they just review documents and emails all day long. So it's whether it's paper or electronics, they're paper-driven, and they don't like to get rid of that paper. So with that being said, what we wanted to talk about a little bit here is how do you handle the navigation of working with corporate legal as an information governance strategist? How do you get there? And it's making sure you understand these three major components as we discussed as a group. What is it that we wanted to bring to you to help you understand the bigger picture of what it is that corporate legal departments and the Office of the General Counsel needs? And we thought it really is you need to understand what the internal operations are. How do you understand what they need from an external collaboration viewpoint, and then how do you figure out what the risk is? Because it all boils down to risk, right? You don't manage the risk, you might as well not have an organization. So the corporate legal department is kind of an island to itself. There's kind of like, we sometimes say they're the redheaded stepchild, right? Nobody understands what it is that they do. So they often are running, and they want to do these things, and then the enterprise team says, no. No, you can't have that tool. No, we don't want you to have that tool. So designing a roadmap for information governance for the corporate legal department is sometimes a challenge for them, and there's a level of frustration, and it's a challenge for the enterprise team that's trying to support them. So I thought that we would start off first by understanding the internal operations of this, and I'm going to turn this over to Dennis and Dawn. I'd like Dawn, who's really handling the legal operations for the corporate legal department at PNC Bank, to talk a little bit about some of the challenges you face and what is it that you do to help with your department?
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies by organization. I think I've seen in some situations that the information governance effort actually rolls up into the legal department, so I imagine in those cases it may be a little bit easier to navigate. In our case, it actually aligns to cyber security at this point. So we have to really make sure that we're inserted into that process, because I think there's a minimum level of retention and other things, for legal and regulatory requirement purposes that you have to have. But then also for some of these tool decisions, like you mentioned, an example is we've been trying to get a document management system off the ground as a legal department for several years, but we're sort of mired in the overall IG project where they're trying to decide how to solve the problem for 55,000 people. And so meanwhile, we're sort of stuck with nothing. So that sometimes gets difficult to marry the organization's overall goals with what we need as a legal department to operate.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I would just also add, Microsoft, we're sort of a unique legal department. We're very large. We're like a large law firm. We have over 1,400 legal professionals who are scattered across the globe, and we have, I think, 10 to 12 different practice groups. So I'm part of a practice group which supports the sales, services, and marketing, the salespeople, basically. So we have different needs than, let's say, the compliance lawyers versus the litigation lawyers versus the competition lawyers, right, versus lawyers and legal professionals who are scattered outside the United States. So, we have sort of a diverse stakeholder set, which we need to satisfy. And I think also a question comes up, and as to who is the client or clients
absolutely.
at the end of the day. So when I think about it, I mean, from a legal department IG perspective, I think the primary client are the legal professionals, the lawyers who need some of these tools. But another client are the business clients who the lawyers and legal professionals are supporting. And then you could also take that as an extension about your customers who you're working with in key deals. How do you work with them? How do you connect with them in terms of the data flows on some of the deals or matters which you're working from? So when I think of clients as sort of a multifaceted sort of perspective.
Right, and I think to that point, depending on what the organization, the enterprise is, right? What is it that the enterprise is developing? Like if I'm developing refrigeration units, well then I have a different need as the enterprise for the kind of software I need to develop, and then the needs of the corporate legal department are going to be uniquely different than what the software is that the refrigeration unit organization would be versus a professional services organization like a banking environment like Dawn is in. They might be very similar, so that disconnect might not be as great. And to Dennis's point about who's the client, like right now I'm doing a project with a utility company. And their business unit has all different, it's like a little mini law firm. They have a real estate division that has to handle, like, where do the utility poles go? They have a litigation group, like, who ran over the utility pole? Like, it's all these different departments inside the law department, but then because it's a utility company, somebody has to deal with the labor union, somebody has to deal with the people doing the trucks, somebody has to deal with, so there's all different things that you don't think about that the law department has to manage.
Well, and I would just say, I would posit that sometimes the law department ends up becoming a customer of your IG effort, because when things go wrong, we're the ones who are going to have to deal with whatever that data situation is, good, bad, or indifferent. So definitely we end up kind of benefiting or not benefiting from how that's implemented.
Right, and part of that IG process, how do you get that software? Go ahead.
And I think another dynamic, too, with the key business clients of being lawyers, basically. The reality is lawyers are usually not fond of technology for the most part. They're a little bit fearful of technology, right? So how do you convince them that technology can really be a lawyer's best friend to achieve more? And so, for the most part, Microsoft, we're a little bit spoiled because most of the lawyers are technologists as well. But we've seen with a lot of our customers who we work with, a lot of their in-house legal departments, and the law firms as well, the lawyers are fearful of technology, fearful of social media. So how do you sort of get over that hump, if you will?
Well, it's also change. They're the last ones to the dance. I wanted to talk a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, Dawn, a little bit about the procurement side of life, because that, again, trying to cross over that bridge, that you're trying to get the software that you need and the things that you need to do. There's a slide, we were trying to put supporting slides. This is an ILTA survey, and ILTA, for those of you who don't know what that organization is, it's the International Legal Technology Association. Dawn happens to be involved in that organization. I am as well. And these were this was a survey they did, and these were kind of their top lists. And they were listed 1, 2, 3, 4. And you'll find later on there's some other things that are there. But if I need to get these things or buy these things or outsource these things, how do you go about doing that from a procurement perspective?
Yeah, in our organization, there's definitely a couple tricky points to that. The first of which is that we implemented a technology standards committee. In the past, we had a problem with different business units kind of going out and shopping and buying whatever it is that they felt they wanted, including legal, and kind of just stomping their feet and saying, this is what we're going to use. And you'd end up with 10 or 12 different solutions for PDFs, for example, or something like that. So we sort of swung very far in the other direction now, where if you want to implement any new technology, it goes through a very rigorous process of being analyzed against technologies that we already have, and trying to say, why can't SharePoint meet the need, or why can't something else meet the need? So you need to be prepared to answer those questions, first of all. And part of doing that is having procurement on your side. And what we did was get a defined person from procurement to work with legal, as a dedicated resource, so that person over time kind of learned our needs and became more of an expert in this field, and that seems to have worked out pretty well for us.
I will say from a Microsoft legal operations perspective, we're fortunate where we have the resources to have a chief technology officer who's really running our department from a technology viewpoint. And we also have a dedicated procurement professional who helps us entering into the right contracts with third-party vendors. We're also a little bit biased and spoiled in that, obviously, as you would expect, we're using Microsoft technology to serve our technology needs. Right? That wouldn't come as any surprise. And of course, we're using Office 365 every day to achieve more, whether it's Skype for Business, whether it's Yammer, Microsoft Teams, OneNote, OneDrive. We use all the workloads as legal professionals all over the world to achieve more and to be more productive and more efficient.
And I think, I again just went through a couple of projects with corporate legal departments, and the procurement was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. And I'm standing in the middle because I serve the client, not the vendor, and certainly not procurement, right? And they're like, no, you can't have that. You can't have that. And then in the midst, they changed procurement people. And we're wondering why it's, where is the project? Oh, yeah. We changed people. Oh, we're starting all over again. What? So it's a nightmare sometimes.
Yeah, when you have that dedicated person, you can say to them, hey, let's cut down the RFP to the necessary questions. Let's not drive everybody nuts.
Yeah,
just to drive
exactly.
Nuts,
And it has to be specialized. They when you start having that person, they recognize here's the reason why, and there's a reasonable discussion, and they're brought in at the beginning instead of at the end, and here's the paperwork. The other thing is here is something something else that came from a business of law technology forum, and these were things about making things do more with less. I mean, everybody's hearing that, cut by 50%, cut by 25%. These were some things where they said, hey, we want you to automate some of these manual tasks. We don't want you to touch things. I think, Dennis, you had mentioned in one of our discussions how you want things to go more smoothly, and we want less people touching things. Automate these things. So,
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've always had a big initiative in our legal department, and we've called it different things. Now we're calling it stop doing. Before we called it de-lawyering. I mean, legal process re-engineering, but really how to get the lawyers out of the business of doing some of the routine, mundane tasks, whether it's handling non-disclosure agreements or maybe less riskier agreements, if you will, and how to have a third-party outsourcer provider maybe handle some of those things. We're also experimenting with chatbots and artificial intelligence. How do we develop sort of more slick FAQs so that chatbots could be sort of a virtual digital concierge or digital assistant to help us and also our business clients get answers to some of the common issues we see time and time again. But that's been a big strategic focus for us for many years, and it's just going to be something we're even more focused on.
And I think one of the things that also helps when you start automating and putting analytics and adding automation is you take the human element out of it and you take the risk. You start taking the risk out of things. So I'm going to move on. Did you want to say anything more, Don? Were you good on anything you wanted to say?
No, I mean, I think another obvious one, you're collecting a lot of billing data if you use a lot of outside counsel. So obviously that's a treasure trove of data that you could be analyzing, seeing how they're staffing your matters, benchmarking your rates, that sort of thing. So there's some cost savings to extract there too.
Okay, good. The next point, so we had, the 3 points. The second point that we wanted to talk to was how do we handle the external collaboration considerations? Like, who are we dealing with externally? And how do we use those collaborations to start developing life cycle, information life cycle governance policies? Like, what are we doing to make sure that we're doing this the right way? And to that point, this was from the Association of Corporate Counsel. This was who's doing things for insourcing and outsourcing of projects to law firms or outside parties. This raises a big question on how are we doing collaboration. So, Dawn, you want to talk a little bit about what your team is doing as far as collaboration is going?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of work with outside counsel, obviously, and also with some legal process outsourcing providers. And, one of the things that we started doing in the last few years is treating them like we would treat any other vendor. It's a big risk for you. You spend a lot of time shoring up your own defenses, but then you're sending some of your most sensitive data to law firms and not really investigating what their controls are like. So we've begun to go out and do our assessments and put them through risk rating and all the other procedures that we would normally put any other provider to the bank through. And you'd be surprised at what you find. It's very interesting. I mean, some places have it buttoned up, some places not as much as you would think. But we always say that you can outsource the process or service, but you can't outsource the risk. So ultimately, at the end of the day, that's on you if something goes wrong.
No, I mean, I would echo that. I mean, we use a number of strategic law firm partners. We use a lot of smaller law firms, too, for our work, and we also put them through the paces to really understand how are they protecting our highly sensitive data. We send out questionnaires for them to fill out. We'll interview them. We'll do a sort of an on-site inspection, and then we'll also bring our big law firm partners to our campus so they could see our practices and our policies. Now, we don't tell our law firms that they must use the Microsoft Cloud or Office 365. We hope they're planning on using that. We think we could do a better job at securing their data and their clients' data versus what they can do in an on-premises environment. But we have been seeing law firms embrace the cloud increasingly.
And one of the things that, that we talked to a little bit, that you'll see a lot of acronyms. We use acronyms in everything. And in legal, they're no different. And there's a thing called LPO. You'll see, are you using LPO? And LPO stands for Law Process Outsourcing. And Law Process Outsourcing is different than using outside counsel, right, where you're sending data out, and it's actually going to a third-party vendor. So it's interesting when you say to a law firm, like when I'm giving a CLE, I said, you're a vendor now. And they're like, I'm offended. I'm a vendor. They are actually a vendor, right? They get a little upset that you call them a vendor. I try to call them a business partner. That makes it a little nicer.
Just be
But
glad we're still calling it all.
it's a vendor. So how do you know, so a legal process outsource, give us an example, Dawn, of what would that be?
Well, I mean, you can see on this chart, the most obvious one is related to e-discovery. So, that's always a smart play to consolidate that work with a legal process outsourcer. Obviously there's a lot of cost savings there, but the other thing is that you've got better control of your data, right? So if you're doing a lot of litigation, let's say you're working with 30 different firms for litigation, if you let them do all the discovery work, then your data is 30 different places. You've got 30 different sets of controls and processes. This way, if you have one vendor that you're working with, you send all the data to them, they do it a consistent way. A Wells Fargo type situation where data you don't want getting out gets out is easier to avoid. I mean, obviously it's always a possibility, but there's different techniques these vendors use to prevent that sort of thing. So it's a really smart thing to do.
And it really is. It's a whole risk management. We all go back to that risk management. I mean, every day we're seeing something about risk. Dennis, did you have anything you wanted to add? All right. So then third component to this is identifying and managing the risk. And, back to that audit. Oh, I did want to ask you one question about that audit, Dawn. How do I know when you send out that questionnaire, because I know what some of my clients have, and I know they get those questionnaires, and I'm not going to tell you how they're answering that questionnaire, but how do you know that they answered that questionnaire correctly?
So realistically, you can't check everyone on everything. That's just impossible if you're a large organization. So what we do is we risk rate the law firms and the vendors we work with based on the types of data they're working with, the types of cases they're working on. And you try to hit the highest priority ones, the hardest. And you go out and do an on-site visit like we've been doing. It takes a day and a half, and you go out and talk through all their controls. You'll visit their data center maybe, depending on what it is, and just try to get a better sense for what's really going on there. Meet the people, talk to them. You'd be surprised if you let people talk what they'll tell you.
Oh, people, I don't know why, it's the Irish face. People tell me stuff they should never tell me. So I just go, oh, thank you, and then I run up to the executive director. Oh, my goodness. So I wanted to show you something. These were some things, and, we tried to get some data for you to see, but this was relating to risk. What, the ACC published their chief legal officer survey, what keeps them up at night, right? So, back to Dawn's little motto is, you can outsource the process, but you can't outsource the risk. These are the kinds of things where they're saying, these are the things that they're worried about. Dennis, what do you want to add?
Well, I mean, I think from my viewpoint, it all comes down to data, right? I mean, we're continuing to see all these high-profile data loss incidents. We saw what happened with Equifax about a week or two ago. We saw their chief information security officer losing, I think, his position or her position. We saw the CEO of Equifax resigning, I think, a few days ago. So we're going to continue to see, unfortunately, these data breaches occur. And from my perspective, I think one of the key things is setting the proverbial tone at the top and making sure that your board of directors, your chief legal officer, your CEO is really focused on having a robust information security strategy, making sure that the senior leaders have time with the chief privacy officer, with the chief information security officer, so they're sharing ideas and knowledge. But this issue about data, and data is very powerful, right? There's a lot of great things associated with being able to analyze data and to learn from the data, but by the same token, there's lots of potential negative consequences associated with data being lost. And so, more than ever before, I think this is such a huge top-of-mind issue for everybody.
And to this point, like here's another one that they provided that look how it continues to go. I think that's a very low conservative number. I mean, to only go 2%, I mean, just this month alone, we went up 5%, right? Just the things that have happened.
And I think Don would agree with this. I mean, it's just, you have to have this sort of assumed breach scenario, right? Because it's not a question of if you're going to get breached, it's a question of when and how to mitigate your risks associated with that. And using, proper security hygiene, making sure people are trained, try to eliminate the possibility for social engineering practices, right? I mean, these are things which, you need to develop as part of your information governance and security plan, and to try to really stress test that as well.
And I think the bigger piece is when we look at some of these security challenges, and again, look how similar it is to their top technology things, right? They kind of intertwine, and it goes back that security is their top technology investment, and security is their top technology concern. And I think the struggle for legal is that they're having to manage and be in charge of, they're in charge of having to manage the crisis that's going to come in front of them when it's not necessarily underneath their control, right, Dawn? Like, there's stuff that's out there that maybe they weren't involved, and I think that takes us back to that dovetail of collaboration, right? Somebody from legal needs to be involved when you're making these decisions. Somebody from legal needs to be sitting at the records management table when somebody's making decisions about your records management policy. Somebody from legal needs to be sitting at that table because the IG team should not be operating in a vacuum, right, Don?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, we're not going to make the ultimate decision, but we could at least give you some advice and some possible impacts to what you're planning to do.
Yeah.
And it always is that balance between security and usability. I mean, an old professor of mine used to say, like, you could bury the servers in concrete if you want, and they're secure, but that doesn't really do you a lot of good. So you have to try to find, a middle ground where your people can get their job done, but it's relatively secure.
I think, Dennis, did you want to add anything to that?
I would just say, maybe this is getting to your next slide about, Windows
this one.
7 versus Windows
yeah,
10.
yeah.
I think the key point here, of course, we love the Microsoft software, but
This is, well, so they can't see this, and maybe they can't see everything. You can see it on the piece of paper. But it's a Windows 7 versus Windows 10. It's an ILTA survey.
yeah.
I mean, what's with that, right? So what this said was, the red says that this, oh, that's a big bug. The red says that that's what they're doing in 2016, Windows 7 versus Windows 10. Dawn, point to where Windows 10 is. There is a 6% of the people have Windows 10. That is by far the most secure piece of software out there. 75% are at Windows 7 64-bit, 15% are at 32-bit, and 4% are at Windows 8, and whatever this other is, I don't know what this other is, but that's what law firms and corporate legal departments are using.
And I think,
scary.
again, I'm biased being the Microsoft guy, but I think if they're using earlier versions of the Windows operating system, they're really putting themselves and their clients at risk. And if you're going to be using Windows 7, at least making sure you're using the appropriate upgrades and security patches, which we've made available out to the marketplace. But, I think our president and chief legal officer, Brad Smith, says this sort of quote, and I'm going to be fumbling it a little bit, but he says that you can't use the tools of yesterday to deal with today's, modern environment where cyber criminals are so sophisticated nowadays, right? And so you got to make sure you're using the current technologies today to protect yourselves, whether it's upgrading to the most, current technology or using other forms of technology to make sure that you're well protected, or else you're going to have gaps in your systems.
And these are questions you need to be asking when you go out and assess your third-party providers. I've been very surprised at places I've gone, and I've asked about, do you have 2003 servers on your network? And they do, and they'll say, well, one of our clients won't move. I say, well, why should their problem become my problem? You can't put everyone at risk. So you have to ask about this stuff.
And last week, I went to a client who upgraded from WordPerfect 5.1 to WordPerfect 18, and my question was, why? Like, can't we just unplug that 5.1 box and stop it? Like, why are we moving? So the stupid things that people decide to do just because nobody told them differently. This last slide, and we're almost ready, and we're 2 minutes ahead, right, Russ? Like 2 minutes behind. So, I put a cloud adoption up here, and again, it's because sometimes we do things because we always did them this way, and we have these fears of technology, and sometimes attorneys, well, no, all the time, except Dennis, all the time attorneys are hoarders of documents, right? They hoard their email, they hoard their paper, they hoard their electronics, and now we're saying, hey, we think we'd like to go to the cloud. And there's a lot of pushback there. And I'd like a little bit of you guys, talking a little bit about what do you think's the better thing for particularly enterprise will say to us, oh, no, we're going to do that much better. We are not going to allow you to move to the cloud.
Yeah, I think I could probably guess what your opinion may be, Dennis, but yeah, I would just say this. Look, companies like Microsoft and Amazon and others, that's their core competency, right? That's what they're very good at, is managing data. So, I think the aversion to it is somewhat just corporations being a little more conservative sometimes on this issue, but I think you're starting to see that change. And I also think it could be a leveler for small and mid-sized organizations and firms that can't necessarily invest the money or resources to put something up that would, suit one of our audits. But if you can use a provider like Dennis, then maybe you can meet those requirements.
Yeah, I'm very biased here, of course, but the cloud has become much more mature than ever before, right? And I think it's, we tell this to our customers, although when we say this, we're trying to be very politically correct, that we think we could do a much better job securing their data in our sophisticated data center environment than what they can do on their own in an on-premises environment. And at times, we'll take them to our data center so they could do a data center tour, so they can see the breadth and the depth of the physical privacy and security measures and compliance standards which we have with regard to our cloud services. So there's no doubt that cloud is becoming more mainstream, but one takeaway I would say to all of you, there's some great cloud providers out there, there's no doubt. We've got some terrific competitors. Just make sure you take your time and do the evaluation and due diligence and get the right folks involved, your IG folks, your legal folks, your privacy folks, your IT, your security folks, to do a comprehensive evaluation of the various different cloud providers, and then move forward with your best smart risk-taking decision.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm the current president of ARMA of New Jersey, and I'm going to say, if you've never heard Dennis give that, if you go to the ARMA New Jersey website, Dennis gave our team WebEx on that topic, and there's some really good takeaways that I think you're still listed up there, Dennis, which is, for those of you that are looking for that to promote to your team about why, he had a whole big list of things to follow there. So just in closing, we're almost all done. There are the three components on how do you get there. You're going to understand the internal operations, you want to analyze all the external and internal collaborations, and you want to really manage the risk, because really, there's one more acronym, right? That's what the acronym is. The meantime before the CEO apologizes or retires, whatever you want to do that last letter, retires, is fired, whatever that thing is, that's that's the goal, because we've all heard the apologies.
It's not just the CEO, too. I mean, we've seen chief legal officers lose their positions, too. I think Ron Bell, who used to be the general counsel of Yahoo after the Yahoo breach, he was sort of,
right.
he resigned.
And it all falls downhill. That might...
With lots of money, with a golden parachute, though, right? So, yeah, he can retire for the rest of his life.
You don't have to cry for it. You don't have to feel bad.
No, we're not feeling real bad. They all got little things, but that's, and that all falls downhill. And when that happens, it's a change all the way down the hill. So it's going to impact everybody. So we want to thank you for your time. The Q&A for any of this is right across the hallway. We are here, and we are glad that you chose to come see us at that 3 o'clock bewitching hour. And right after that is going to be the next session in the bigger room, I believe. So thank you so much, and we'll see you around.